it seems that we are in one of those periods right now. Of course, in this part of Europe in 1989, we had something similar. And if we go back to when Poland regained independence in 1918, that was also something very similar in this part of Europe, in which these large empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the German, the Russian, they all collapsed. And Poland didn't regain its national independence in a vacuum. It was these states were created from Finland in the north, the Baltic states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Romania had technically been created in 1878, so they had been around earlier, but nevertheless there was a string of nations that came into existence. The Ukrainians made their attempt at national independence. Even in Belarus you had some people trying the same. So there are these moments in history in which in large geographical areas a lot happens at the same time. For the Poles, if we make these comparisons to Belarus and Ukraine, in Ukraine the attempt went quite far. It just wasn't strong enough to survive on its own. The Bolsheviks, the Soviets, Russian Bolsheviks, they crushed it. They crushed their national independence aspirations. In Belarus, it was really a seed, you could say, that had been planted in the previous decades, but it was far from being strong enough to survive on its own. In Poland, what was interesting, fascinating even, I would say, is that we had various political ideologies, various political camps. We could probably count at least 4 large ones. The Christian democracy, so to say, socialism, national democracy, or a form of conservative nationalism, and then you had this Piłsudski's strand of socialism as well. So these were people that were competing against each other, but once that important moment in Poland's history arose, they all united forces. When the war was going on with Bolshevik Russia and the Red Army, which really started at the turn of 1918, 1919, when there was some initial communist attempts at taking the city of Vilnius. Later in February 1919, you have the first clashes between the Polish army and the Soviet Red Army in today's Belarus, right on the border of where Belarus and Poland border today. And then naturally in 1920, the big year when first the Poles, they pushed into Kiev, then the Red Army pushed the Poles all the way back from Kiev to Warsaw, and the great Battle of Warsaw took place on the outskirts of the capital city. This was a time of enormous struggle, and if Polish society wouldn't have been united then it would have crumbled under the weight and pressure. The Soviet Red Army marching into Poland, they were expecting to be greeted by the working class with flowers and milk and honey, or bread and salt as it is in Slavic custom. But they were surprised when they saw that the Polish working class went to church. They listened to their local priest, to their bishop, even their cardinal in Rome, and they would have none of it. For them, national identity was much more important, and this is what really made Poland's independence possible, because there was a certain struggle that had brought Poland to that moment of November 11th, 1918, but it could only go so far. In November 1918, what changed was now Poland was theoretically and very quickly, realistically, its own independent state, and it could shape its own fate and its own loss. So without this unity, without the ability to rise above, so to say, these internal squirrels, or quarrels rather, this is what makes these nations, that when there is a tough moment, you unite behind the national cause and you fight on. Today, you could say that Ukraine is in a similar moment. They regained independence when the Soviet Union crumbled in 1991. Nevertheless, sure, it was also a struggle that had been going on for centuries, to be honest. Even in the Soviet Union, there was always this effort by some Ukrainian circles to elevate the Ukrainian national independence or Ukrainian culture, because at moments when you can't fight for independence, you can at least fight for the attempt to preserve your own language, to pass it down at least to your own children. But it wasn't that Ukraine itself made the Soviet Union crumble in 1991. So you could say that that independence was in a certain degree, maybe not handed to them, it sounds bad, but it wasn't really that enormous level of national struggle that you need
Which
to
you see
really...
with Poland.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, look, that's a marvellously positive note on which to end. Can Ukraine in this war, so maybe this is Ukraine's sort of 1918 moment?
It certainly looks that way. There are many people that make that comparison, and looking at what the Ukrainians have done up until this moment, they are certainly doing all they can.
All they can, and let's hope they are successful. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for that, Adam. There we are, a very another eventful canter across the course of Polish history from 1918, a seminal moment for many countries, but particularly for Poland. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Poland Daily History.